Professor Mortyn adjusted his teaching harness and stared at the collection of young aliens sprawled across the amphitheater seating. 27 cadets from 12 different species, all convinced they were the next great warriors of the galaxy. How delightfully naive. "Attention, future cannon fodder," Mortyn announced, his forearms gesturing dramatically. The Zephyrian's natural sarcasm dripped from every word. Today marks another thrilling episode of Let's See Who Actually Has What It Takes, also known as Demonstration Day. A few eager tentacles shot up from the Aquarian section. The Draconians puffed out their chest scales. The Felixians just yawned and stretched, because apparently showing off was beneath them. Typical. Mortyn had been teaching at the Galactic Combat Academy for 37 cycles, and every semester brought the same parade of overconfident youngsters. The academy prided itself on producing elite soldiers from across known space. In reality, most of these kids would probably faint at their first real deployment. Now for those whose attention spans exceed that of a Minden fruit fly. Mortyn continued, scanning the room. Today we'll be introducing you to some of the galaxy's more challenging inhabitants. Creatures that make your worst nightmares look like bedtime stories. The room buzzed with excitement. Of course it did. Nothing got young aliens more excited than the prospect of proving their bravery against something with more teeth than brain cells. Mortyn's gaze swept the back rows and landed on the human exchange student. Amy Kowalski sat there with the same expression she'd worn for the past 6 weeks, mildly interested, like she was watching paint dry on a particularly slow day. The girl barely spoke, never volunteered for anything, and seemed content to blend into the background. Humans, such an odd addition to the Academy's diversity program. Their homeworld had only recently joined the Galactic Council, and frankly, Mortyn wasn't sure what they brought to the table. They were small, soft, and appeared to lack any obvious natural weapons. No claws, no scales, no poison glands, just there. Today's demonstration, Mortyn announced with theatrical flair, will separate the genuine warriors from the pretenders. We've acquired something special from the void sectors, something that will test every instinct you think you possess. The Academy's main doors groaned open with a mechanical whine that echoed through the amphitheater. Quartermaster is stumbled in, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something resembling barely controlled panic. Behind him, a hover platform carried what could only be described as a nightmare wrapped in reinforced containment protocols. Professor Mortyn, Quartermaster called out, his voice cracking slightly. The specimen has arrived. Mortyn rubbed his hands together with glee. Excellent. Class, meet your new friend, a genuine Shadowmaw from the void sectors. The cage itself was a work of art. 3 layers of energy shields hummed around bars made from compressed neutronium. Warning lights blinked in 17 different languages, most of which translated to variations of "Do not approach" and "Call for backup immediately." Inside the containment unit, something moved. The Shadowmaw uncurled itself slowly, revealing its true horror. 12 feet of muscle and malice, covered in midnight black hide that seemed to absorb light itself. 8 tentacles writhed around its central mass, each one thick as a draconian's torso and tipped with barbs that dripped some sort of acidic substance. But the worst part, the eyes. 7 of them, arranged in no pattern that made sense, each one glowing with an intelligence that suggested it was already planning exactly how to dismantle everyone in the room. The creature's psychic presence hit the amphitheater like a sledgehammer. Several students immediately began sweating. A young Aquarian made a sound that might have been whimpering. Even the proud Draconians shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Now that, Mortyn announced cheerfully, is a Class 7 Apex Predator. Notice how it's already analyzing each of you for weaknesses. The Shadowmaw can sense fear, predict movement patterns, and oh yes, it enjoys playing with its food before consuming it. Professor Hendricks from the Xenobiology department rushed over, his usually pale complexion now approaching transparent. Mortyn, are you absolutely certain about this? The containment fields are holding, but this thing's psychic output is off the charts. I'm reading emotional manipulation capabilities that could. Relax, Hendricks. Mortyn waved him off. 40 years of field experience didn't prepare me for a classroom demonstration. Please, Dr. Valencio from Combat Psychology wasn't buying it either. She kept glancing between her scanner readings and the beast, shaking her head. The stress hormones in this room are spiking. Some of these students are approaching panic levels just from proximity. Mortyn looked around the amphitheater with satisfaction. Krax the Draconian was trying to hide behind his pride, but his claws were extended. Xena the Felixian had gone completely still, every instinct screaming at her to find the nearest exit. Even massive Blorg, built like a living tank, was unconsciously backing away from the arena. But then Mortyn's attention drifted to the back row again. Amy Kowalski sat there with the same bored expression, now absently examining her fingernails. Not a trace of elevated heart rate, no defensive posturing, nothing. She looked like someone waiting for a particularly dull lecture to end. Right then, Mortyn clapped his 4 hands together, the sound echoing through the suddenly quiet amphitheater. Who wants to go first? Come now, don't be shy. This is why we're here, after all. Krax the Draconian stood up immediately, his scaled chest puffed out with typical warrior pride. I shall demonstrate proper combat technique against this creature. His voice carried that insufferable tone that suggested he'd already won the fight. Wonderful. Our resident hero volunteers. Mortyn gestured toward the arena floor. Step right up, Krax. Let's see that legendary draconian courage in action. The moment Krax entered the training arena, everything changed. The Shadowmaw, which had been lazily coiled in its cage, suddenly snapped to attention. All 7 eyes focused on the young draconian with laser-like intensity. The creature's tentacles began moving in slow hypnotic patterns, and a low rumble emanated from deep within its chest. Krax activated his combat stance, claws extended, ready to prove his superiority. Bring it on, beast. The Shadowmaw struck. Not physically, of course. The containment field held perfectly. But the psychic assault hit Krax like a freight transport at full velocity. The proud warrior's eyes went wide as the creature began projecting every primal fear his species had developed over millions of years of evolution. Darkness. Being hunted. The feeling of something massive and hungry stalking him through endless corridors. Krax lasted exactly 28 seconds before stumbling backward, his scales now a sickly pale green. I need to true. Fascinating. Mortyn noted cheerfully. Next volunteer. The volunteers. Xena the Phylixian practically flowed down to the arena floor, her natural grace on full display. Perhaps stealth and agility will prove more effective than brute force. The Shadowmaw's attention shifted to her instantly. This time, its tentacles moved differently, tracking her movements with predatory precision. Xena began her demonstration, using every trick her species had mastered: silent steps, misdirection, rapid position changes. It didn't matter. The beast followed her every move, as if she were broadcasting her intentions directly into its mind. When she feinted left, it anticipated. When she rolled right, it was already there. The creature's psychic abilities let it read her muscle tension, her breathing patterns, even the tiny micro-expressions that preceded each movement. Xena lasted 41 seconds before her nerve broke completely. This is impossible. It knows what I'm going to do before I do it. She retreated to her seat, fur standing on end, looking like she'd seen her own death written in those terrible glowing eyes. Lorg, Mortyn called out. Care to show us how a proper tank handles the situation? The massive Titan-class student lumbered down to the arena, with the confidence that came from being nearly indestructible. His natural armor plating could deflect plasma rounds. His species had evolved on a world where everything tried to kill you, usually successfully. The Shadowmaw regarded Blorg with what might have been amusement. Then it did something different. Instead of projecting fear or tracking movements, it simply stared. And in that stare was a message that transcended species barriers. I see your armor. I see your strength. I also see the 17 different ways I could crack you open like a snack container. Blorg, who had never retreated from anything in his life, took 3 steps backward. Perhaps this demonstration has provided sufficient educational value. The unease in the amphitheater was now thick enough to cut with a plasma torch. Students whispered nervously among themselves. Faculty members exchanged worried glances. Even Quartermaster A was edging toward the exit. Mortyn surveyed his thoroughly demoralized class with barely concealed glee. 3 attempts, 3 spectacular failures. Now for the grand finale. His gaze settled on the human girl still sitting quietly in the back row, looking about as engaged as someone waiting for public transport. Well, Mortyn announced with theatrical flair. It seems our most experienced warriors have provided excellent examples of what not to do. Perhaps we need a fresh perspective. He gestured dramatically toward Amy. Miss Kowalski, would you care to grace us with a demonstration? A few nervous chuckles rippled through the amphitheater. Several students turned to look at the human with expressions ranging from pity to morbid curiosity. The general consensus seemed to be that if 3 elite alien warriors couldn't handle the beast, the small human would provide a brief but memorable finale to the class. Amy looked up from her wrist device with mild surprise, as if she'd forgotten where she was. Oh sure, I guess. She stood up with all the enthusiasm of someone agreeing to take out the garbage. As she made her way down to the arena floor, Mortyn couldn't help but feel a twinge of anticipation. This would be entertaining. The human moved with no particular grace, no combat readiness, no apparent awareness that she was about to face down one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. She even paused halfway down to tie her shoe, completely oblivious to the mounting tension in the room. "Take your time," Mortyn called out cheerfully. "I'm sure our friend in the cage is eager to meet you." Amy finally reached the arena floor and turned toward the containment unit. That's when everything went wrong. The Shadowmaw, which had been actively tracking every movement in the room for the past 20 minutes, suddenly went completely still. Not the coiled spring stillness of a predator preparing to strike. Just still. Like someone had hit a pause button on the universe's most terrifying creature. Amy stood there, hands in her pockets, looking at the beast with the same expression she might give a particularly uninteresting museum exhibit. So, is something supposed to happen? Or, the silence in the amphitheater was deafening. 7 glowing eyes that had been radiating pure predatory menace moments before now seemed vacant. The Shadowmaw's tentacles, which had been writhing with hypnotic patterns, hung limp at its sides. Mortyn blinked, then blinked again. The creature should be responding to your presence." Amy shrugged. "Maybe it's tired." She checked her wrist device again, and actually yawned. A full, unguarded yawn that echoed through the stunned silence. "How long is this supposed to take? I've got a study group at 1500 hours. The whispers started immediately. Students leaned toward each other, voices hushed but urgent. Why isn't it reacting? Is the containment field interfering with its abilities? Look at its eyes. They're not even focusing on her. This isn't right. This isn't right. At all. Mortyn felt the first cold tendril of panic creep up his spine. In 40 years of military service, he'd seen Shadowmaws reduce entire squads to gibbering wrecks just by looking at them. This particular specimen had been specifically chosen for its aggressive nature and powerful psychic abilities. It should be projecting terror, analyzing weaknesses, preparing to mentally dissect the human girl standing just meters away. Instead, it sat there like an oversized, thoroughly bored house pet. Perhaps Dr. Valencio called out from the faculty section, her voice tight with confusion. "We should check the containment systems. There might be some sort of interference." "The systems are functioning perfectly," Quartermaster A replied, his voice getting higher with each word. "All readings are normal. The creature is, it's just not what?" Mortyn demanded, not paying attention to her at all. Amy, meanwhile, had found a spot on the arena wall to lean against. She pulled out a small rectangular device and began tapping on it with her thumbs, apparently deciding to pass the time with whatever humans used for entertainment. The Shadowmaw's massive head actually turned away from her. Mortyn stared at this impossible scene. The most dangerous predator in 3 sectors was actively avoiding eye contact with what should have been the easiest prey in the room. This wasn't just unexpected. This was fundamentally wrong. It violated everything he knew about predator behavior, about Shadowmaw psychology, about the basic laws of nature itself. "Miss Kowalski," he called out, his voice cracking slightly, "perhaps you could move around a bit." Try to get its attention. Amy finally looked up from her device and glanced around the silent amphitheater with mild confusion. "So, are we done with the pet, or is there more to this?" The word pet hit the room like a physical slap. Mortyn's 4 arms went limp at his sides. "Pet? Well, yeah." Amy gestured casually toward the containment unit. "I mean, it's cute in a tentacly sort of way. But when do we get to the actual demonstration? The dangerous part." The Shadowmaw, upon hearing itself described as cute, actually flinched. Its massive form pressed against the back of the cage, as if trying to put as much distance as possible between itself and the small human. Mortyn's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Miss Kowalski, that is a Class 7 apex predator, has eliminated entire military squads. It feeds on fear, and projects terror directly into its prey's mind." Amy blinked at him. "Oh, well, that explains why it looks so confused." She turned back toward the creature with something approaching sympathy. "Poor thing probably doesn't know what to do with someone who isn't afraid of it." You're not afraid," Professor Hendricks stammered. "Of that?" Amy pointed at the Shadowmaw, which was now actively cowering. "Why would I be? It looks like a cross between a squid and an angry cat. Back home, we had a neighbor's pet that was way scarier than this thing." The silence stretched until Dr. Valencio finally found her voice. "What? What kind of pet?" "Oh, just a regular house spider, about the size of a dinner plate. Used to catch birds in its web." Amy's tone remained conversational, like she was discussing the weather. My little sister Sarah used to feed it grasshoppers when she was 7, called it Fluffy. Several students made choking sounds. Quartermaster A had gone completely pale. But that's nothing compared to the stuff we'd encounter on camping trips. Amy continued cheerfully. There was this one time when I was 12. We were hiking through what the park rangers called mildly challenging terrain. Ran into a brown bear. Mama bear actually. With cubs. Mortyn felt his worldview beginning to crumble. What? What did you do? Made myself look bigger. Backed away slowly. Avoided eye contact. Standard procedure. Though I'll admit, when she stood up on her hind legs, she was probably about, Amy held her hand up, calculating, oh maybe 9 feet tall. With claws longer than your fingers and teeth designed for crushing bones, the Shadowmaw had now curled itself into what could only be described as a defensive ball in the corner of its cage. Of course, Amy went on, oblivious to the growing horror around her. Bears are basically teddy bears compared to the really dangerous stuff, like great white sharks, or saltwater crocodiles, or box jellyfish. Those little guys are adorable, but one sting and you're dead in about 3 minutes. Dead? Blorg whispered. Super dead. But hey, at least it's quick. Unlike some of the other stuff, we had this biology field trip once where we studied funnel web spiders, aggressive little guys, about the size of your thumb, but their venom causes paralysis while keeping you fully conscious, so you get to experience everything that happens next. Professor Hendricks was now holding onto his desk for support. Everything that happens next. Well, being eaten alive, obviously. Most Earth predators prefer their prey fresh. Amy's matter-of-fact tone made it somehow worse. Though to be fair, humans aren't usually on the menu. We're pretty good at the whole not being praised thing. Mortyn's mind raced back through every interaction he'd had with the human military exchange program. The way the Earth delegation had been so enthusiastic about sharing their peaceful students with other species. The generous funding they'd provided. The almost eager way they'd signed the cultural exchange agreements. Miss Kowalski, he asked slowly. What exactly does Earth classify as dangerous? Amy thought for a moment. Well, there's different classification systems, but generally anything that can kill more than say 1,000 humans at once gets bumped up to noteworthy threat. 1,000? Dr. Valencio's voice cracked. Give or take. Though that's for natural disasters mostly. For individual creatures the threshold is lower. Maybe a couple hundred deaths per year to make the handle with caution list. The faculty exchanged looks of dawning horror. Mortyn did some quick calculations. If Earth's threshold for dangerous was creatures that could kill hundreds of humans, and humans weren't even considered prey by their predators, and this was what they sent to represent their peaceful student exchange program. What? Quartermaster A asked in a tiny voice. What do humans consider a Class 7 threat? Amy brightened up. Oh, we don't really use that classification system. But if you mean something equivalent to, she gestured at the still cowering Shadowmaw, we'd probably rate that as a Class 2 threat. Maybe Class 1, if it was having a good day. Class 2. Mortyn's voice came out as a squeak. Yeah, mild inconvenience category. Like you might want to call animal control, but it's not an immediate evacuation scenario. Now, a Class 7 threat, that would be something like a blue-ringed octopus. How big is this octopus? Blorg asked, despite clearly not wanting to know the answer. About the size of a tennis ball. Super cute, really. Bright blue rings. Very pretty. One bite contains enough venom to kill 26 adult humans. No known antidote. The amphitheater doors burst open with a hydraulic hiss, and Admiral Vashi strode in with the kind of purposeful urgency that suggested he'd received some very disturbing reports. His aide, Commander Tom Molly, followed close behind, looking like someone who'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. Professor Mortyn. Admiral Vashi's voice carried the kind of authority that made stars realign themselves. I've received some concerning communications about today's demonstration. Something about a complete failure of standard predator protocols. Mortyn opened his mouth to respond, but only managed a strangled sound. He gestured helplessly toward the containment unit, where the Shadowmaw was still pressed against the far corner, occasionally making soft whimpering noises. Admiral Vashi followed his gaze, and stopped dead. Is that creature attempting to hide? Yes, sir, Mortyn croaked. From her. He pointed at Amy, who was now sitting cross-legged on the arena floor, apparently playing some sort of game on her device. The Admiral's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and the beginning stages of what might have been an existential crisis. Explain. Well, sir, it appears that our Class 7 apex predator is... How do I put this? Mortyn struggled for words, utterly terrified of our human exchange student. Amy looked up helpfully. Oh hi, Admiral. Is this about the demonstration? Because I can bring my pet hamster next week, if you want a better comparison. Mr. Whiskers is way more intimidating than this guy. Commander Molly's datapad slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers. Pet? Hamster? Yeah, he's adorable. About this big. Amy held her hands a few inches apart. But he's got these tiny black eyes that just stare into your soul, you know. And when he runs on his wheel at 3 in the morning, it sounds like a freight train. Plus he once bit through a steel food dish, because I was 5 minutes late with dinner. Admiral Vashey turned to Mortyn with an expression that suggested someone had just explained that gravity was optional. Professor, are you telling me that a Shadowmaw, a creature that has single-handedly depopulated 3 minor colonies, is cowering in fear of a student, whose pet hamster is apparently more threatening? That appears to be the situation. Yes, sir. Amy stood up and brushed dust off her uniform. Look, I don't want to be rude or anything, but you guys seem to have some pretty weird ideas about what's dangerous. I mean, this thing would barely register on our threat assessment scale back home. What exactly would it register as? Admiral Vashey asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Oh, maybe a class 2. Mild threat. Handle with standard caution protocols. Like you'd want to call the local wildlife management office. But it's not exactly an emergency situation. Commander Molly found his voice, though it came out several octaves higher than usual. What would constitute an emergency situation? Amy considered this seriously. Well, back home we'd probably start evacuating cities if we spotted something like a Kodiak bear in an urban area. Those guys can weigh up to 1,500 pounds and run 35 miles per hour. Or maybe a saltwater crocodile. Those are pretty serious. 23 feet long. Bite force of over 3,000 pounds per square inch. The Shadowmaw made a sound that was definitely whimpering now. But honestly, Amy continued, the really dangerous stuff on Earth doesn't look scary at all, like mosquitoes. Tiny little insects, but they kill more humans every year than any other creature on the planet. Malaria, dengue fever, yellow fever, about 1 million deaths annually, give or take. Admiral Vashey sat down heavily in the nearest chair. Miss Kowalski, what exactly do humans consider to be their planet's apex predators? Oh, that's easy. Humans. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of several faculty members quietly hyperventilating. Though, Amy added thoughtfully, my little sister Sarah and her scout troop went camping in grizzly bear territory last month. 12-year-olds, you know, for fun. They roasted marshmallows and told ghost stories while listening to something that could literally tear them apart snoring in the woods 50 meters away. Commander Molly made a strangled noise. For fun. Well, yeah, it's character building. Plus the park rangers said there hadn't been any bear attacks in that area for almost 6 months, so it was considered pretty safe. Admiral Vashey looked around the amphitheater, taking in the cowering apex predator, the traumatized students, and the completely unperturbed human girl who apparently considered interdimensional nightmares to be mildly interesting pets. 3 weeks later, Mortyn stared at the memo on his desk with the hollow-eyed expression of someone whose entire understanding of reality had been systematically dismantled. Effective immediately, all dangerous creature demonstrations are suspended pending review of threat assessment protocols. The Shadowmaw had been quietly returned to the void sectors, though rumor had it the creature now required therapy sessions before it could function normally again. The Academy's new threat evaluation system had been completely overhauled, with one simple addition to every assessment form. Would this concern a human? If the answer was no, it was automatically downgraded to minor inconvenience. Amy Kowalski had become the unofficial benchmark for danger classification, though she seemed blissfully unaware of her new status. Students from 12 different species now gave her a wide berth in the corridors, whispering among themselves about the terrifying predator world she called home. The Draconians spoke of her in hushed, respectful tones. The Felixians had started leaving small offerings of food near her desk. Even the Aquarians, normally the most confident species in the Academy, had begun treating her with the kind of careful deference usually reserved for barely contained explosives. Mortyn had submitted his resignation letter that morning. 40 years of military service, and it took one human teenager to make him realize he knew absolutely nothing about the galaxy's actual power structure. Hey, Professor Mortyn. Amy's cheerful voice cut through his existential crisis like a plasma torch through tissue paper. She bounded up to his desk with the same casual energy that had traumatized an apex predator into early retirement. Yes, Miss Kowalski, he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. I just got back photos from my family's vacation last week. Want to see? They went to this really relaxing spot in Australia. She pulled out her device, swiping through images with obvious excitement. Look, here's my mom swimming with some local wildlife, and here's Dad teaching my little brother how to handle the baby ones. Mortyn looked at the screen, and felt what remained of his sanity pack its bags and head for the door. The images showed humans, actual humans, voluntarily entering water with creatures that looked like they'd been designed by someone's worst nightmares. Those are sharks, he whispered. Yeah, great whites, mostly. Though there were a few tiger sharks too. Dad says next year we might try cage diving with bull sharks. Those guys are supposedly pretty feisty. Amy scrolled to the next photo. Oh, and here's Sarah with a huntsman spider she found in their hotel room. She named him Gerald. Mortyn closed his eyes and began mentally composing his application to the Galactic Postal Service. Delivering mail to uninhabited moons suddenly seemed like a much safer career choice.